The morning started like many others for the single father. He woke before sunrise, moving quietly so he would not disturb his young son sleeping in the next room. Their small apartment was old, but clean. He always made sure of that. He believed that even if life gave little, one could still keep things in order. He stretched his back a little, feeling the familiar ache from years of work and years of service before that. But he did not complain. He had learned long ago that complaining never solved anything. He warmed water on the stove and made a simple breakfast. He always prepared his son's lunch early, putting it carefully into a small container. It was nothing fancy, but he made sure it was balanced so his boy would never feel hungry during school hours. He remembered times in his own childhood when food was not always certain, and he did not want his son to experience that. When the boy finally woke up, still rubbing his eyes, the father smiled gently. He helped him get ready for school, tying his shoelaces and fixing his shirt collar. They did not have many long conversations in the morning because the father did not want to rush him, but there was a warm understanding between them. They both knew they had each other, and that was enough. After walking his son to the school gate, he headed toward the luxury hotel where he worked part-time. The hotel was tall, bright, and busy, filled with people who looked like they had never struggled a day in their life. He did not envy them. He simply wished he had even half the opportunities for his son. He worked in the maintenance department, doing small repairs, moving supplies, and helping wherever needed. It wasn't glamorous, but he was grateful for the job. The hotel was always full of wealthy guests, and some treated workers like invisible shadows. Others were polite. He never expected kindness, but he appreciated it when it happened. On this particular morning, the hotel lobby was even busier than usual. A group of high-profile business guests had arrived for a conference. They walked in wearing expensive suits, carrying sleek briefcases, talking loudly about deals and money. Every step they took seemed to say they owned the world. The father kept his head down and focused on his work. He carried a box of cleaning supplies across the lobby, moving quickly so he wouldn't be in anyone's way. But as he turned a corner, someone stepped in front of him unexpectedly. He tried to slow down, but it was too late. His shoulder brushed against a wealthy guest who instantly reacted as if something terrible had happened. The guest stopped walking and looked down at his own sleeve as if checking for damage. His expression twisted in irritation, his eyebrows pulling together. "Watch where you're going," the man snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the conversations around them. Several people turned to look. The father immediately apologized, keeping his tone calm. "Sorry, sir. I didn't see you." But the man wasn't interested in hearing his apology. Instead, he scoffed loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. "I swear, this place hires anyone. You people can't do even the simplest job right." The father stayed quiet, not because he agreed, but because he didn't want to make a scene. He knew how these situations worked. If he argued, he'd be seen as the problem. If he stayed quiet, the moment would pass. A few staff members nearby looked uncomfortable, but none stepped forward. The guest was too important. The hotel valued his money more than the dignity of the worker he had just insulted. The father lifted the box again and began to move, hoping the confrontation would end. But the guest wasn't done. He took a step forward, blocking the path. "Hold on," he said. "What's that on your arm?" The father paused. He glanced down. His sleeve had rolled up slightly as he carried the box, revealing a tattoo on his forearm. It was old and faded, but still clearly shaped with careful lines. The guest narrowed his eyes at it, then smirked. "Let me guess. One of those tattoos people get because they think it makes them tough?" The father shook his head gently. "No, sir. It's from a long time ago." The guest laughed under his breath. "Sure it is. The father didn't bother explaining. There was no point. His tattoo wasn't decorative, and it wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was a quiet reminder of years. He rarely talked about years of discipline, sacrifice, and music that once filled his life. He continued walking, but the guest followed, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting from the people around. "Tell me," the man said loudly, "do you have any talents? Anything at all? Or do you just carry boxes for a living?" Though the father kept moving, his steps became slower. Not because he was intimidated, but because he didn't want the situation to escalate. The guest glanced toward the grand piano in the middle of the lobby. It was polished daily, a beautiful black instrument that sparkled under the lights. "How about this?" the man said, his voice growing louder. "If you're so capable, why don't you play something? Go on. Show us what you can do." Several guests and staff members turned their heads again. A few whispered to each other, confused. Others looked amused. They assumed the wealthy man was making a joke. The father stood still, unsure how to respond. His heartbeat picked up, not from fear, but from discomfort. "Sir, I really need to get back to work," he said quietly. "What's wrong?" The man mocked. "Scared? Or do you just not know how to do anything except lift things?" The father looked at the piano, then back at the man. "I just don't want any trouble." The guest leaned forward. "You already caused trouble when you bumped into me. So now you can make up for it. Sit at the piano." A staff member stepped closer, clearly wanting to help, but not knowing how. The father gave a small nod to show he was fine. He didn't want anyone else dragged into the situation. He set the box down by the wall, straightened his shirt, and slowly walked toward the piano. With every step, he felt the eyes of the lobby follow him. He wasn't embarrassed for himself. He was embarrassed for his son, who would hate to see him put on display like this. He reached the piano bench and stood beside it, not sitting yet. "Sir," he said softly, "this really isn't necessary." "Oh, but it is," the wealthy man replied with a grin. "People like you always pretend to have something special. Let's see it." The father lowered his gaze. He tried to find the right words to end the situation peacefully, but none came. Finally, he accepted that the only way out was through. He sat down on the bench slowly. His hands rested on his knees, not touching the keys. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Memories he had pushed away for years drifted back, the smell of an old rehearsal hall, the sound of instruments tuning, the laughter of fellow musicians, the discipline of training, the pride of serving through music, but he kept those memories buried. This moment wasn't about performance. It was about enduring disrespect while keeping his dignity. As he sat there, the lobby quieted a little. People moved closer, curious. Some expected him to play poorly. Others expected him to refuse. No one expected anything extraordinary. He opened his eyes again. His heart felt heavy, not because of the challenge, but because he hated being forced into a corner. He looked down at the keys. They were cool and smooth, waiting. He had not touched a piano in years. Life had become too busy with responsibilities. The wealthy man crossed his arms, already smirking, already believing he had won. "Go on," he said. "Let's hear this hidden talent of yours." The father placed one hand gently on the keys, not pressing down yet. His fingers trembled slightly at the memories the piano awakened. He breathed slowly, steadying himself. Then, before he could play a single note, someone in the crowd gasped softly. An older guest standing nearby stepped forward, pointing at the tattoo on the father's forearm. His voice was soft but clear. "That tattoo? I know that symbol. You served in the musical unit, didn't you?" Several people turned toward the older guest, confused. The wealthy man frowned, not understanding what was happening. The father looked at the older man, surprised. He gave a small nod. The older man's expression changed completely: respect, recognition, even admiration. That unit is one of the most elite groups in the entire military, he explained to those around him. They don't recruit just anyone. Only musicians with extraordinary discipline and skill earn that mark. The lobby became silent. The wealthy man's smirk faded slowly. Staff members stared at the father with newfound understanding. The father didn't move. He didn't boast. He didn't explain. He just sat there quietly, wishing the moment would simply end. But now the entire lobby waited. The atmosphere had shifted. Not because he wanted attention, but because the truth had surfaced on its own. He took a long breath, feeling the past and present meet inside his chest. Then, finally, gently, he pressed the first key. The sound of the first key still hung in the air when the father lifted his hand again, unsure whether he should continue. He had not planned to play anything. He had not even planned to touch the piano. All he wanted was for the moment to pass quietly, so he could return to work and finish his shift without more trouble. But the lobby was now silent in a different way. It was no longer filled with amusement or mockery. Instead, there was a strange kind of waiting. People who had been busy checking in or talking on the phone were now watching him with curious eyes. The wealthy man who had pushed him into this situation stood with his arms still crossed, but the confidence on his face had weakened. His eyebrows were pulled together, not in anger this time, but in confusion. He was starting to realize he might have misjudged the quiet worker. The older guest who recognized the tattoo stepped a little closer. His expression held familiarity, like someone who knew the weight of long years and the stories hidden behind them. "You don't have to play if you don't want to," he said softly. The father appreciated the kindness. He gave a small nod, but didn't speak. Talking about his past was something he rarely did, not because he was ashamed, but because those memories carried both pride and pain. Music had once been the core of his life, but life had taken turns he never expected. Still, he did not touch the keys again. Instead, he lifted his hands onto his lap and looked at the piano from a distance, almost like you look at an old friend you haven't seen in years. Something inside him felt tight. The piano had been a place of comfort in his youth, a place where he found discipline, escape, and expression. But after the military, he had stepped away from that world entirely. The wealthy guest, uneasy with the sudden shift in atmosphere, cleared his throat. "Well, go on then," he said, though his voice was less sharp now. "If you're really someone important, show us." The father did not answer him. Instead, he stood slowly, thinking that leaving might be the best option. But before he could take a step away, the hotel manager arrived, drawn by the gathering in the lobby. The manager looked at the small crowd, and at the father, and at the wealthy guest. "Is everything all right here?" he asked carefully. The wealthy man forced a small laugh. "We were just having a little fun. I wanted to see if your worker here could play. He bumped into me earlier, and I thought he could make up for the inconvenience with a little entertainment." The father lowered his gaze, wishing the ground would swallow him. He never wanted this attention. The manager glanced at him with concern. He had always known the father as hardworking, quiet, and reliable. Seeing him placed on the spot like this made him uncomfortable. "You don't have to play," he said firmly. "If there was a misunderstanding, we can handle it." But before he could step away, someone else in the lobby spoke up. "Wait," a woman said softly. "If he doesn't mind, maybe he could play something. Just one piece." Others mumbled in agreement, not out of pressure, but out of genuine curiosity. Something had shifted. People weren't looking at him as a worker anymore. They were looking at him as someone with a story. The father closed his eyes for a moment, trying to decide. Playing a piano after so many years wasn't something he could just do casually. Music wasn't just sounds or finger movements. It came from memories, from parts of himself he had locked away. But he also knew that if he walked away now, the wealthy guest would twist the situation again, making it look like the father was running out of fear. And though he had no desire to prove anything, he did want to protect his dignity. He took a deep breath and sat back down on the bench. The lobby fell into complete silence. His hands hovered over the keys. They felt unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. He pressed one key lightly, then another. Small, soft notes filled the room. He wasn't playing a full piece yet, just testing the touch of the keys, feeling the weight of them. His fingers trembled not from lack of skill, but from emotion. The sound awakened memories he had kept quiet for years. Slowly, he began to play a simple melody. Nothing grand or dramatic. Just a slow, gentle tune he used to play during late-night practice sessions in the military hall. A piece that had once helped him calm his mind before long missions. The lobby transformed with the sound. People stopped talking. The workers paused in their routines. Even the wealthy man stood still, unsure how to respond. The melody grew a little louder, the notes flowing with a natural ease. His fingers moved like they remembered the path on their own. He was not performing for anyone. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply letting the music breathe again. A child sitting with his parents leaned forward, his eyes wide. A couple standing near the elevator held each other's hands, moved by the unexpected beauty of the moment. The father played for less than a minute before stopping. Not because he couldn't play more, but because he didn't want to get lost in the past. He lifted his hands again, letting the final note fade. A soft wave of admiration rippled through the lobby. Not loud applause, just quiet awe. The wealthy man stood frozen, clearly regretting his earlier behavior. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The older guest stepped forward again. "You haven't forgotten," he said with a warm smile. "Your touch is still there." The father nodded once, still unsure how he felt. He didn't want praise. He didn't want attention. He simply wanted to return to his simple life and provide for his son. But now the room saw him differently, and that made him uneasy. The manager cleared his throat gently. "That was beautiful," he said. "You never mentioned you played." "I didn't think it mattered," the father replied quietly. "It does," the manager said. "More than you know." The wealthy guest finally stepped forward. "Look, earlier, I might have overreacted." He spoke cautiously, aware that his behavior had been witnessed by many. The father looked at him, but didn't say anything. "I didn't know you were?" "Well," the guest struggled for words. "That talented," the father responded gently. "You didn't need to know. I'm just doing my job." The wealthy guest nodded nervously, unable to find a way to save himself from the embarrassment. The father stood from the piano, ready to return to his work. But as he turned to leave, the manager stopped him. "Take a short break," he said. "You deserve it." The father thanked him quietly and stepped away from the piano. He picked up the box he had set down earlier, feeling all the eyes still on him. He walked through the lobby more slowly this time, not because he was avoiding attention, but because he felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift in how people saw him. As he approached the staff hallway, he heard a small voice behind him. "Sir?" He turned. It was the child who had watched him play. "That was really nice," the child said shyly. The father smiled gently. "Thank you." The child grinned before running back to his parents. Inside the hallway, the father sat on a bench. He placed the box next to him and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. He wasn't angry or upset. He was simply tired emotionally more than physically. He thought about his son and wondered what he would think if he had seen him play. He imagined his little boy smiling, saying, "Daddy, I didn't know you could do that." The thought warmed his heart, but the moment also reminded him of the life he once lived, the life he had left behind. Music had been a huge part of him. It had shaped him, disciplined him, and given him purpose. But after leaving the military, he had shut that door quietly. He never wanted to chase fame or recognition. He only wanted peace, stability, and safety for his family. Still, something had changed today. Not by choice, but by chance. After a few minutes of rest, he stood up and returned to work, determined to finish his duties. He moved around the hotel, repairing small issues, helping other staff, and keeping to himself. Some workers smiled at him with a new kind of respect. A few whispered, clearly still talking about what they had witnessed. He accepted it quietly, not letting it distract him. But the wealthy guest wasn't done. Later in the afternoon, as the father passed through the lobby again, the wealthy man approached him, this time with no arrogance, no smirk, only a nervous politeness. "I want to talk to you," he said, trying to sound casual. The father paused but didn't look uncomfortable. "Yes, sir?" "I didn't mean to embarrass you earlier," the man said carefully. "I thought it would be harmless. I didn't expect." He gestured vaguely toward the piano. "All that." The father nodded politely. "It's fine, sir. I'm not upset." The man looked relieved, but also hesitant. "Do you play professionally? Or did you used to?" "I used to," the father answered simply. "And now you don't?" "No, sir." The wealthy man shifted uncomfortably. "Well, for what it's worth, you're very good." "Thank you," the father said. The conversation ended quickly. The wealthy man walked away awkwardly, and the father continued with his tasks. But the day was far from over. Late in the evening, as the father prepared to clock out, he noticed a few guests gathered around the piano again. They were whispering and pointing at it, clearly still thinking about his earlier performance. He shook his head gently, amused in a quiet way. It amazed him how something so small, a short melody, could create such a reaction. He didn't know it yet, but this moment was only the beginning. His day had started like any other, but it would not end like any other, because what happened next would change everything, not just for him, but for the people who had witnessed the moment shift from mockery to respect. The next morning, the father woke up earlier than usual. The memory of yesterday's incident lingered in his mind. He had not expected to be drawn into the spotlight, even for a moment, and yet the memory of the melody he had played on the piano still carried a strange warmth. It reminded him of a part of his life he had kept tucked away, hidden behind long years of work and responsibility. After making breakfast and packing his son's lunch, he walked the boy to school as usual. The sun rose softly over the streets, and the air was calm. The boy chatted about small things, a new game at school, a friend who had visited, but the father listened more than he spoke. His mind was elsewhere, replaying yesterday's brief performance. When he arrived at the hotel for his shift, the lobby seemed unchanged at first glance. Guests moved briskly through the polished floors, and the sound of the fountain echoed softly in the background. He greeted his coworkers quietly and began his routine tasks. But something was different. He could feel it. Several staff members gave him small nods or smiles. A few whispered in hushed tones as he passed. They were no longer just acknowledging his presence. They were acknowledging respect. He felt a flicker of discomfort and surprise at the same time. He had never sought attention or recognition, and the sudden shift in how people looked at him was unfamiliar. As he carried supplies through the lobby, he noticed the wealthy businessman from yesterday standing near the entrance, checking his phone. Their eyes met briefly, and the man's expression was unreadable. He did not approach immediately, but the tension in the air was noticeable. The father moved past him without incident and began setting up equipment for a conference that would take place later in the day. He focused on his work, keeping his thoughts controlled, but his fingers itched slightly with a desire to touch the piano again. He pushed the thought away. This was a job, not a stage. His son's future mattered more than anyone's curiosity. Mid-morning, the wealthy man approached him. This time, there was a different energy. There was no arrogance in his posture, no smirk on his face. Instead, there was a cautious curiosity. "I need to ask you something," the man said. "Can we talk somewhere private?" The father hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse. He had no intention of becoming the subject of anyone's amusement or fascination. But another part knew this conversation was inevitable. They moved to a quieter corner of the hotel, near the back lounge. The man spoke first, his voice subdued. "Yesterday, I acted poorly. I was rude, unfair, and presumptuous. I made assumptions about you that were completely wrong." The father listened silently. He had learned to respond with calmness rather than anger. He knew that arguing would only escalate the situation. "I also need to ask you," the man continued, "do you still play? Or was that yesterday the first time in years?" The father looked down at his hands, then slowly shook his head. "I used to play regularly. For a long time. Not anymore. Life became complicated." The man nodded slowly. "I see. I want to apologize properly. I didn't realize who I was speaking to. I didn't know your history, your skills, your story." The father gave a small nod, accepting the apology without much comment. He didn't need words to understand that the man was genuine in his attempt to make amends. "Listen," the man said carefully, "I don't want to embarrass you again, but would you consider playing for a small gathering later? Just for some guests. It would mean a lot to them." The father considered it briefly. He could refuse, and perhaps it would be the simplest choice. But he also realized that playing, even briefly, could be harmless. It could bring a little calm and beauty into the hotel's atmosphere. And perhaps it could be done on his own terms, quietly, without spectacle. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "That's all I can promise." The man smiled faintly, not pressing further. "That's fair. Thank you." The rest of the morning passed with relative calm. The father moved through the hotel, attending to his duties with a quiet efficiency. He noticed a few guests giving him polite nods, clearly remembering his earlier performance. He avoided eye contact, not wanting to encourage unnecessary attention at around noon. The lobby began to fill with guests for the afternoon conference. The piano gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The father found himself walking past it several times, each time resisting the urge to sit and play a few notes. He reminded himself that this was work, not a performance. Then, just before the conference was set to begin, a staff member approached him nervously. "Excuse me," the worker said. "Some guests were asking if you could play something before the event starts. They heard yesterday, and they'd really like it." The father sighed softly. He did not want to draw attention, but he also saw the opportunity to create a small moment of calm and joy. He nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "A short piece. That's all." The staff member smiled gratefully and guided him to the piano. The lobby had filled further, but most guests were occupied with conversations. Unaware of what was about to happen, he sat at the piano and let his hands hover above the keys. His fingers remembered their positions as if they had never left. The familiarity brought a wave of nostalgia and a tinge of sadness. This was a skill he had once treasured, a form of expression he had abandoned not because he wanted to, but because life had demanded other priorities. He pressed a few gentle notes, testing the feel of the keys. A soft melody began to emerge, slow and deliberate. He did not play for anyone but himself. He allowed the music to fill the space, creating a quiet oasis amid the bustling hotel. As he played, some guests began to notice. Conversations quieted, and eyes turned toward him. The wealthy man watched from a distance, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. He was no longer mocking. He was witnessing skill and emotion firsthand. The melody grew slightly, carrying emotion without flamboyance. It was not a showpiece, but it was compelling. Each note seemed to tell a story of discipline, dedication, and life experiences that were both beautiful and bittersweet. The father lost himself in the music for a few moments. Time seemed to slow, and the lobby transformed. People who had been busy or distracted stopped to listen. A few staff members paused in their work, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the sound. After a short piece, he lifted his hands from the keys. The lobby remained quiet for a few seconds, as if no one could believe what they had just heard. Then soft applause began, polite but sincere. It grew gradually, carried by admiration rather than expectation. The wealthy man stepped forward slowly, offering a small, respectful nod. "That was incredible," he said. I didn't know." The father gave a quiet smile, acknowledging the words, but not seeking further praise. He simply wanted to return to his work, to the tasks that paid the bills and kept his life steady. But now, the dynamic in the hotel had changed. Guests and staff alike regarded him with a new kind of respect. They saw a man who had skill, patience, and discipline. They saw someone who had endured and persevered. After the applause, the father returned to his duties, careful to keep his focus on the work rather than the recognition. He moved through the lobby, carrying supplies, checking on small issues, and assisting guests where needed. Throughout the afternoon, he noticed subtle changes. Guests treated him with more courtesy. Staff whispered words of admiration. Even the wealthy businessman maintained a respectful distance, clearly reconsidering his earlier assumptions. By the time the conference began, the father felt a sense of calm accomplishment. He had faced an unexpected challenge, navigated it without losing his dignity, and shared a part of himself that had long remained hidden. That evening, as he prepared to leave, he paused near the piano once more. His fingers traced the smooth surface, and he allowed himself a private smile. The music had reminded him of who he was beyond the roles he played daily: father, worker, veteran. He walked out of the hotel quietly, the sun setting behind tall buildings. The streets were filled with the usual sounds of evening traffic and chatter. He thought of his son, waiting at home, probably finishing homework or playing quietly. A small feeling of hope stirred within him. Life was still difficult, still full of responsibilities and struggles. But there were moments like today that reminded him that talent, dignity, and kindness could not be ignored. And though he did not know it yet, the events of the day were only the beginning. The recognition, respect, and opportunities that would come in the following days were slowly building, setting the stage for a transformation in both his life and the perception of those around him. He reached his apartment that evening, greeted his son with warmth, and prepared a simple dinner. Yet even in these ordinary tasks, a quiet pride lingered. He had faced judgment, held his ground, and reminded the world without boast or arrogance that there was more to him than anyone could have guessed. The following day, the father arrived at the hotel with the same quiet determination he had maintained for years. The memory of his small performance yesterday lingered in his mind, and he felt an unfamiliar mix of curiosity and apprehension. He didn't seek attention, yet he knew the piano would be in the lobby, its presence unavoidable, and that some guests might remember what they had heard. As he entered the lobby, he noticed a few staff members glancing at him, giving small nods and smiles. Some whispered to each other, glancing at the piano as if waiting for something to happen. He moved quickly past them, carrying supplies, and tried to focus on his duties. The hotel was already busy, with guests checking in, chatting, and rushing to appointments. Mid-morning, the wealthy businessman from before appeared again, standing near the grand piano. This time, he approached the father with a different demeanor. There was no smirk, no arrogance, only a careful, respectful curiosity. "Good morning," the man said softly. "I wanted to ask you something." The father nodded. "Yes, sir?" "Yesterday, when you played, something unexpected happened. People were impressed, and, well, I was wrong about you. I would like to make amends in some way," the man explained. "There will be a small gathering today. It's private. Only a few important guests. I thought perhaps you could play for them." The father paused. He had promised himself he would not let music become a spectacle again, not for anyone. Yet he sensed this was different. It was not mocking him this time. The man's words felt sincere, and he realized that this opportunity could be managed on his own terms. "All right," he said quietly. "I can play a short piece." The man's expression softened, and he nodded. "Thank you." As the day progressed, the father prepared for the gathering. He adjusted his shirt sleeves, making sure the tattoo on his forearm was visible this time, though unintentionally. The symbol on his skin caught the eye of an older guest nearby, who immediately recognized it. "That's the mark of the elite military musical unit," the guest said softly to someone beside him. "Very few people earn that honor. Only the most skilled musicians are part of it." The comment spread quietly among the small gathering. The father, unaware of the attention his tattoo had drawn, focused on the piano, testing the keys with his fingers. The familiar touch awakened memories of long hours of practice, discipline, and passion. He felt the weight of his past, not as a burden, but as a source of quiet strength. The gathering began as the guests took their seats, chatting politely. The wealthy man, sitting near the front, kept his gaze fixed on the father, clearly anticipating what would come. He no longer underestimated him. The father took a deep breath and let his fingers hover above the keys. He began with a slow, gentle melody. The notes were soft at first, testing the atmosphere, allowing the guests to adjust to the unexpected performance. The room grew silent, with all eyes on him, though he was unaware of the depth of their attention. As he continued, the melody gained subtle complexity, flowing smoothly from one phrase to the next. He played with control and emotion, letting the music speak in ways words could not. Each note carried a piece of his history, discipline, patience, and moments of both triumph and sorrow. A few guests leaned forward, captivated by the skill and the passion that seemed to radiate from the piano. The older guest, who had recognized the tattoo, smiled faintly, nodding in quiet approval. He understood the story behind the music and the man who played it. The wealthy businessman watched, his initial skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. He could feel the depth of the talent he had once mocked. The father's presence at the piano commanded respect without a word. The piece reached a gentle climax, not with showiness, but with controlled emotion that resonated through the room. The guests were silent, caught up in the unexpected beauty of the performance. Some were visibly moved, their eyes reflecting surprise and admiration. When the father finally lifted his hands from the keys, the room remained quiet for a brief moment, as if savoring the end of the music. Then soft, sincere applause began, gradually growing as each guest recognized the skill and heart behind the performance. The wealthy man stepped forward, his expression humbled. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. "I never imagined." The father acknowledged the words with a quiet nod. He did not seek praise, but he accepted the recognition with calm dignity. The guests continued to discuss the performance quietly among themselves. whispering admiration for the man who had remained so humble, despite his evident skill. As the gathering concluded, the father returned to his duties, carrying supplies and assisting staff as usual. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not from recognition, but from reconnecting with a part of himself he had nearly forgotten. The music had reminded him of who he was, beyond the roles of worker, father, and veteran. During a brief moment of rest, he noticed the wealthy businessman approaching again. This time, there was a different energy, a mixture of respect and caution. "I wanted to say thank you," the man said quietly. "Not just for the music, but for handling yesterday. Everything with dignity. You could have reacted differently, but you didn't." The father gave a small, polite nod. "I did what I had to. That is all." The man nodded again, clearly reflecting on his own behavior. "I understand, and I want you to know. That tattoo, your background, your skill, it's more than impressive. It's inspiring. You've reminded everyone here of something important." The father remained quiet, not out of disinterest, but out of habit. He had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. As the day wore on, the father continued with his tasks, his movements calm and efficient. Staff members looked at him with newfound respect, and guests occasionally offered polite nods or smiles. He moved through the hotel quietly, maintaining his routine while carrying the subtle acknowledgement of his hidden talent. By the evening, the lobby had returned to its usual activity. The father paused near the piano, placing his hands lightly on the keys. He didn't play, only felt the smooth surface beneath his fingers, a quiet reminder of yesterday and today. The music he had shared was a bridge between the past he had left behind and the present he navigated. As he prepared to leave for the day, he thought of his son in the small apartment waiting for him. He felt a quiet sense of hope and pride. Life was still full of challenges, but there were moments like these that reminded him of the value of patience, resilience, and hidden strength. Walking out into the evening air, he felt the weight of yesterday and today settling into a calm determination. The piano had revealed a part of him he had long kept hidden, and though he had not sought recognition, the respect and acknowledgement he received were undeniable. He reached home, greeted his son warmly, and settled into the familiar rhythm of family life. Yet, even in the quiet moments, the memory of the performance lingered, a gentle reminder of the talent, history, and dignity that shaped him. The next morning, the father woke with a quiet sense of anticipation. Although he did not expect it, the memory of the piano had remained with him overnight. He had thought of little else during the night: the gentle notes, the careful melody, the way the music had quietly filled the hotel lobby and touched the guests. He had no desire to perform, yet he could not ignore the pull it created within him. After preparing breakfast and seeing his son off to school, he made his way to the hotel. The lobby was bright, bustling with activity, yet a subtle sense of curiosity lingered in the air. Staff members whispered to each other as he passed. The wealthy businessman from previous days was already there, standing by the piano and watching him carefully, though he did not approach at once. As the father began his work, delivering supplies and attending to minor repairs, he noticed guests glancing at him with a hint of recognition. Some whispered, others smiled politely. The earlier performances had not been widely shared, but word spread quietly through conversations in the lobby and brief mentions to the staff. People were beginning to notice the quiet man who could play with such skill and heart. Mid-morning, the wealthy man approached him, more carefully than before. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he began. "I wanted to ask if you would consider playing for a special event tonight. It's not public, just a few important guests. I know it's sudden, and I understand if you say no." The father paused. He had no desire for attention, yet he sensed this time it would not be mocking or humiliating. It would be different a chance to share something meaningful, quietly, without spectacle. "I can play," he said at last. "A short piece." The man's relief was visible. "Thank you. That means a lot." The rest of the day passed with a quiet tension. The father worked diligently, moving through the hotel efficiently. Yet his thoughts returned frequently to the piano, to the music that lay dormant in his fingers. He wondered how it would feel to play again, fully, in front of an attentive audience, even a small one. It had been years since he had truly shared his gift out. As evening approached, the hotel prepared for the special gathering. The room was elegant but understated. Guests settled into chairs near the piano, chatting softly. The father took a few moments to adjust himself, rolling up his sleeves and revealing the tattoo on his forearm. This time, he did not try to hide it. The symbol carried meaning, a piece of his history and identity. An older guest noticed it immediately, whispering softly to another, "That tattoo is from the elite military music unit. Only the most skilled musicians have it. This man is remarkable." The father sat on the piano bench, fingers hovering above the keys. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling hours of practice, discipline, and the joy he had once felt in creating music. His hands rested lightly on the keys, testing their feel. Each note brought back memories, not only of music, but of resilience, patience, and long years of learning. He began to play slowly. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, but as the melody unfolded, it gained subtle depth and confidence. His fingers moved naturally, guided by muscle memory and emotion, carrying a story through each phrase. The music was not showy or dramatic. It was honest, controlled, and beautiful. The guests listened in quiet admiration. Conversation ceased, and eyes followed each movement of his hands across the keys. The wealthy businessman, sitting near the front, watched in awe. The arrogance that had marked his first interactions had disappeared, replaced by genuine respect and astonishment. The melody grew in complexity, yet remained gentle. It was as though each note carried the weight of life experiences, discipline, struggle, and quiet triumph. The father had not sought recognition, but the room responded naturally to the truth conveyed in the music. A few guests were visibly moved, leaning forward, eyes wide, taking in the unexpected depth of talent. The older guest who had recognized the tattoo smiled faintly, nodding in approval. He understood the meaning behind the music, and the man who had chosen a life of quiet dedication despite his skill. The father continued, letting the music flow from memory and feeling. He lost himself in the melody, not thinking of audience, recognition, or judgment. He played because it was who he was, because music had shaped him and remained a part of his soul. As the piece reached its gentle climax, the room was silent, absorbed in the quiet power of the performance. When the final note faded, there was a brief pause, a moment for the audience to reflect, to absorb the beauty they had witnessed. Then, soft, sincere applause began. It grew steadily, carried by admiration and respect, not by expectation. The father lifted his hands, acknowledging the response with quiet dignity. He did not speak, did not seek praise, but allowed the recognition to exist as it was deserved. The wealthy businessman stepped forward, humbled. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly. "I never imagined. You have incredible skill." The father nodded politely. "Thank you. I appreciate that." The guests continued to discuss the performance among themselves, speaking softly, careful not to disturb the calm atmosphere. They recognized not only the talent, but the humility and quiet strength behind it. After the gathering, the father returned to his usual tasks, assisting staff and moving through the hotel with quiet efficiency. The mood had shifted subtly. Staff members treated him with newfound respect, and guests occasionally offered polite nods or warm smiles. He moved through the hotel quietly, focused on his responsibilities, but aware of the change in perception around him. Later, during a brief pause, the wealthy businessman approached him again. "I want to apologize once more," he said. "I was wrong to judge you initially. Today, it's clear now that you possess not only skill, but remarkable character. I underestimated you." The father acknowledged the words with a small nod. He did not need to elaborate. Actions had spoken more than words already. The man continued, "I would like to offer you a chance to play at future events here. Not as a spectacle, but as a respected performer. I understand if you decline." The father considered briefly. He had not sought recognition, but the opportunity was different now. It was no longer about being mocked or tested. It was about sharing a part of himself with people who genuinely valued it. "I will consider it," he said finally. "On my own terms." The man nodded, satisfied. "That is all I ask." The father returned to his work, carrying supplies and checking minor issues, but his mind was calm and reflective. He had faced judgment, navigated it with dignity, and shared a part of himself he had long kept hidden. The music had not only reminded him of who he was, but had allowed others to see it as well. As the evening came to a close, he prepared to leave. The hotel had returned to its normal rhythm, yet the memory of the performance lingered in the air. He walked out quietly, thinking of his son and the apartment waiting at home. Despite life's challenges, there were moments like these that reminded him of patience, resilience, and the quiet power of hidden strength. He reached home, greeted his son warmly, and settled into a simple dinner. Even in the ordinary routines of family life, he felt a quiet sense of pride and hope. The piano had revealed a part of him that could not be ignored, a part that connected his past, present, and future in a subtle, powerful way. And though he did not yet know it, this moment, the combination of talent, dignity, and quiet perseverance, would lead to changes in his life that he had never anticipated, slowly transforming the perception of those around him and the opportunities that lay ahead. The next morning, the father woke up with a sense of calm determination. The events of the past few days had shifted something within him. He had not sought attention, yet the acknowledgement of his talent had reminded him of a part of himself he had long kept hidden. As he prepared his son for school, he felt a quiet pride, thinking about how these moments might shape their future together. At the hotel, the atmosphere felt different. Staff members greeted him with respectful nods, and a few guests whispered his name when they saw him. He moved through the lobby with a steady focus, tending to his usual tasks, but he could sense a subtle change in the energy around him. People were beginning to notice more than his work. They were noticing him, the man behind the diligence and quiet demeanor. The wealthy businessman approached him again, this time with a small, genuine smile. "Good morning," he said softly. "I wanted to ask if you might consider playing for a charity event we are hosting next week. It's private but important, and it would mean a lot to the guests. No pressure if you decline." The father considered the request. He had not sought recognition, yet he understood this was different. It was not mocking or testing. It was an opportunity to share something meaningful on his own terms. "I will play," he said quietly, "but only for a short piece." The man nodded, grateful. "Thank you. That is all I ask." As he began his work, the father reflected on the way music had shaped his life. In the military, it had been discipline, focus, and order. Afterward, it had been a personal sanctuary, a connection to himself and to memories he treasured. He had not played publicly for years, not because he wanted to hide, but because life had demanded practicality over artistry. Yet now, the piano had become a bridge between his past and the present. The day passed with its usual challenges, guests to assist, maintenance to complete, and tasks that required attention. Yet beneath the routine, He felt a quiet anticipation for the event ahead. The piano in the lobby stood like a silent reminder of both responsibility and opportunity. In the late afternoon, he was led to the event room, a quiet, well-lit space with guests already seated. They were an attentive crowd, aware of the significance of the gathering. He adjusted his sleeves, revealing the tattoo on his forearm. A few guests noticed immediately, recognizing the symbol and murmuring quietly about its significance. His history and dedication were evident without a word. He sat at the piano bench, fingers resting lightly on the keys. The first notes were gentle, testing the instrument, reconnecting with the familiar touch. The melody began slowly, carefully, allowing the music to flow naturally. Each note carried a story of patience, perseverance, and the quiet triumphs of a life shaped by both discipline and responsibility. Guests listened intently, captivated by the honesty and skill in his playing. The wealthy businessman, seated near the front, watched with genuine admiration, his earlier arrogance replaced by respect. The father's performance was not about showmanship. It was about expression, about sharing a piece of himself through the music. As the piece unfolded, subtle complexity emerged, each phrase moving seamlessly into the next. The melody was both calming and inspiring, evoking emotions that words could not convey. Some guests leaned forward, visibly moved by the depth of talent before them. The older guest who recognized the tattoo smiled quietly, nodding in appreciation, understanding the discipline and dedication behind the skill. When the final notes faded, the room remained silent for a brief moment, as if absorbing the impact of what they had witnessed. Then, soft, sincere applause began, gradually growing as guests expressed their admiration. The father lifted his hands, acknowledging the response with quiet dignity, not seeking praise, but accepting recognition gracefully. The wealthy businessman approached him after the performance. "That was remarkable," he said softly. "You have a rare gift. I underestimated you before, and I want to make amends properly. Your talent, your composure, and your humility are inspiring." The father nodded. "Thank you," he replied simply. "I am glad I could share a piece of myself." The event concluded, and the father returned to his usual tasks, moving through the hotel with a sense of quiet confidence. Staff members treated him with respect, and guests acknowledged him with polite smiles and nods. The experience had subtly changed the dynamics around him. He was still the hard-working, quiet man he had always been, but now there was a recognition of his depth and skill that could not be ignored. Over the following days, the father continued his work with the same diligence, but the piano remained a constant presence in his thoughts. He began to play briefly during quiet moments, reconnecting with the discipline and pleasure of music. The act of playing, once private and dormant, had become a source of calm and reassurance, reminding him of who he was beyond his responsibilities. Word of his skill began to spread quietly among the guests and staff. The wealthy businessman suggested occasional performances, small and private, always respecting the father's terms. Each opportunity allowed him to share his music in a controlled, meaningful way. Without pressure or spectacle. The father's life continued with its challenges. But these moments of expression brought a new balance. Music became a bridge between the responsibilities of daily life and the quiet satisfaction of personal accomplishment. He discovered